The cameras were rolling, the audience was laughing, and then suddenly everything stopped. Steve Harvey's microphone hit the floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the Family Feud studio. In 40 years of television, he had never abandoned his post mid-show. But when he saw the crumpled piece of paper in Timothy Rodriguez's trembling hands, something deeper than entertainment took over. This wasn't about ratings anymore. This was about a promise a dying mother made to her son, and the man she somehow knew would help keep it. The Rodriguez family had traveled 18 hours from El Paso, Texas, squeezed into their modified van with Timothy's wheelchair secured in the back. 12-year-old Timothy sat in his racing striped chair, wearing his lucky red hoodie and the biggest smile anyone had seen from him in months. His grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez, 68 years old with calloused hands and gentle eyes, had driven through 2 nights to get them to Atlanta. The Family Feud appearance wasn't just a game show opportunity for them. It was a lifeline, a chance to win money that could change everything for a family that had already lost so much. Timothy had been born with spina bifida, spending his entire life navigating a world built for people who could walk. But that had never defined him. What defined Timothy was his laugh, infectious and pure, and his ability to find joy in the smallest moments. His mother, Carmen Rodriguez, had raised him with the unwavering belief that his wheelchair wasn't a limitation, it was just how he got around. She had filled their small apartment with laughter, dreams, and the constant sound of Family Feud episodes playing on their old television. Carmen had been obsessed with Steve Harvey, not in a celebrity worship way, but in the way someone recognizes a kindred spirit. She would watch his interactions with contestants and tell Timothy, "That man understands people's hearts, Miguel. He sees past everything else and just sees the person." When Timothy would have bad days, when kids at school made comments about his chair, when medical appointments overwhelmed him, Carmen would put on Family Feud and they would watch Steve Harvey make people feel important, valuable, seen. The ritual had started when Timothy was 7 and facing his 3rd surgery. Carmen had brought a small television to the hospital room, and they had watched Family Feud every afternoon during his recovery. She would make up answers before the contestants could respond, doing voices for different family members, making Timothy laugh until his stitches hurt. During those long weeks, Family Feud became more than entertainment. It became their escape, their daily dose of joy, their reminder that there was still laughter in the world even when everything felt scary and uncertain. Carmen had memorized Steve's mannerisms, the way he paused before revealing answers, how he made every contestant feel special regardless of how they performed. She would tell Timothy stories about the families they watched, imagining their lives beyond the television screen. "Look at that grandmother," she would say. "See how proud she is. That's real love, Micho. That's what family looks like." 6 months ago, everything changed. Carmen Rodriguez, 34 years old and Timothy's entire world, was diagnosed with aggressive brain cancer. The doctors gave her 3 months. She lasted 4, fighting every day not for herself but for more time with her son. In her final weeks, when the pain medication made her drift in and out of consciousness, she had one obsession: getting Timothy and his grandfather onto Family Feud. She had applied for the show months earlier, back when she was healthy, thinking it would be a fun family adventure. The application process had been lengthy, involving video submissions, phone interviews, and background checks. Carmen had spent hours perfecting their family video, showcasing Timothy's personality, their family's dynamics, their genuine love for the show. She had been confident they would be selected, telling Timothy with the certainty only mothers possess, "We're going to meet Steve Harvey, baby. I can feel it." The acceptance call came 2 weeks after her funeral. Miguel had answered the phone, his voice still rough from crying, and almost declined. How could they go on a game show when Carmen wasn't there to share it? But then he remembered her final request, whispered to him in the hospital room when Timothy was sleeping in the chair beside her bed. "Promise me," she had said, her voice barely audible, "if we get picked, take Timothy, and make sure he gives Steve this letter. Promise me, Papa. Steve Harvey will understand. He'll know what to do." Carmen had written the letter during her final week, when her hands could barely hold a pen but her determination was unshakable. She had labored over every word, rewriting sections until they said exactly what she needed them to say. Miguel had found the letter on her nightstand the morning after she passed, sealed in an envelope with Timothy's name written in her careful handwriting. Inside, along with the letter, was a note for Miguel: "Give this to Steve Harvey when Timothy is ready. He'll know when that is." The Family Feud studio was exactly as magical as Timothy had imagined. The bright lights, the colorful set, the energy of 300 audience members, all focused on having fun. Steve Harvey commanded the stage with his perfect suit and megawatt smile, making everyone feel like they were part of something special. Timothy's family, rounded out by his uncle Roberto, Aunt Lisa, and cousin Maria, stood at their podium ready to play against the Thompson family from Alabama. The pre-show preparation had been extensive. Production assistants had worked with Timothy to ensure his wheelchair was positioned perfectly for camera angles, that he could reach the buzzer comfortably, that he felt included in every aspect of the game. The crew had been professional and kind, but Timothy could sense their extra attention, the way people sometimes treated him with careful consideration that reminded him he was different. During the pre-show warm-up, Steve had worked the crowd with his signature humor, but when his eyes landed on Timothy in his wheelchair at the family podium, something shifted in his expression. Not pity, not awkwardness, just recognition. Here was a kid who belonged here just as much as anyone else. Steve had walked over during the break, knelt down to Timothy's level, and asked him about his chair. "This is a cool ride," Steve had said, examining the racing stripes Timothy had added himself. "How fast does this thing go?" "Pretty fast," Timothy had grinned. "Want to race later?" Steve had laughed, a genuine laugh that made Timothy's entire family smile. "You're on, young man, after we finish making some money for your family." The interaction had lasted only minutes, but it set the tone for everything that followed. Timothy felt seen, valued, normal. His grandfather had watched from nearby, tears forming in his eyes as he witnessed the kind of acceptance Carmen had always insisted Timothy deserved. The game had started normally. The Rodriguez family was holding their own, with grandfather Miguel providing steady answers drawn from decades of life experience, and Uncle Roberto bringing the energy with his animated celebrations of every point scored. Timothy had been designated as the family's good luck charm, positioned at the end of the podium where he could buzz in if needed, though everyone knew his job was mainly to cheer and bring the positive energy that made him special. The first 3 rounds had gone smoothly. Miguel had nailed things you find in a toolbox with hammer, earning the #1 answer, and a huge celebration from the family. Maria had scored big with reasons people call in sick to work, answering "don't feel good," and generating laughter from the audience. The Rodriguez family was ahead by 40 points, playing with the kind of chemistry that made for great television. But during the 4th round, something happened that nobody saw coming. The category was Things That Give You Strength, and it was Timothy's turn at the buzzer. Steve had walked over with his usual charm, ready to engage with the youngest member of the Rodriguez family. "All right, Timothy," Steve had said, his voice warm with encouragement. "Things that give you strength. What do you think?" Timothy had looked up at Steve, then glanced back at his grandfather, who was nodding encouragingly. That's when Timothy reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, worn soft from being handled so many times. His hands were shaking as he held it. "Mr. Steve," Timothy had said softly, his voice barely picking up on the microphones, "my mom wanted me to give you this." The studio audience was still buzzing with game show energy, unaware that something profound was about to unfold. Steve looked at the paper in Timothy's small hands, then at the boy's face, and something in the child's expression made him pause. This wasn't part of the game anymore. "Your mom?" Steve asked gently, taking the paper. "She died 4 months ago," Timothy whispered, and suddenly the studio began to quiet as people realized something serious was happening. "But she said, if we ever got on your show, I should give you this letter. She said you would understand." Steve Harvey had been handed thousands of things by contestants over the years. Photos, business cards, small gifts, but this felt different. The weight of the paper seemed heavier than it should be, charged with something that made his hands pause before unfolding it. He looked at Timothy, then at Miguel, who was watching with tears already forming in his eyes. "Can I read this now?" Steve asked Timothy. Timothy nodded, biting his lip in the way kids do when they're trying not to cry. Steve unfolded the letter carefully. It was written in neat handwriting, the kind a mother uses when she wants every word to matter. As his eyes scanned the first few lines, his expression changed completely. The entertainer mask slipped away, replaced by something raw and human. The camera caught the exact moment Steve Harvey stopped being a game show host and became something else entirely. Steve read the letter once, then looked up at Timothy with an expression of such profound understanding that everyone in the studio could feel it. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his jacket pocket, and then did something unprecedented. He set down his cards, walked away from his mark, and approached Timothy's wheelchair. "Timothy," Steve said, his voice different now, stripped of performance. Your mom wrote something beautiful here. She told me about you, about how strong you are, about how you face every day with a smile, even when things are hard. Timothy's eyes filled with tears, but he kept looking at Steve with the trust that only children can offer. She also told me, Steve continued, kneeling down beside Timothy's wheelchair, that you sometimes forget how special you are, that sometimes you feel different from other kids. Is that true? Timothy nodded, unable to speak. The studio had fallen completely silent. Even the production team had stopped their usual chatter, sensing that something sacred was happening on their stage. Well, your mom wanted me to tell you something, Steve said, and now his own voice was thick with emotion. She wanted me to tell you that being different isn't being less, it's being more. You know why? Timothy shook his head. Because you have to be twice as brave as everyone else, every single day. You have to face things that would scare grown-ups, and you do it with a smile. That's not different, Timothy. That's superhuman. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, but something about the authenticity of the moment kept them rolling. This wasn't television anymore. This was life happening in front of cameras. Steve stood up slowly and began removing his suit jacket. The same navy blue jacket he wore for every taping, the one that had become part of his television identity. He held it out, then gently draped it over Timothy's shoulders. Your mom wanted you to have something that would remind you how strong you are, Steve said. This jacket has been with me through every show, every moment I've tried to make people feel good about themselves. Now it's yours. When you need to remember how brave you are, you put this on and you remember that you've got people who believe in you. Timothy looked down at the jacket, which was enormous on his small frame, then back up at Steve. She really wrote about me? She wrote about her hero, Steve said simply, and her hero is you. The audience erupted, not in the typical game show applause, but in something deeper. People were standing, crying, applauding not for entertainment, but for recognition of something beautiful and true. But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the Thompson family, still standing at their podium, watching this unfold with their own tears. Thompson family, Steve called out, would you mind if we did something different today? Would you mind if we stopped competing and started celebrating this young man instead? Without hesitation, the Thompson family left their podium and walked across the stage. The grandmother, Mrs. Thompson, knelt down beside Timothy's wheelchair and took his hand. Your mama raised something special, she told him, and we're honored to be here with you today. What happened next defied every rule of television production. Steve announced that both families would share the winnings, that the game didn't matter anymore because something more important was happening. He asked Timothy if he wanted to answer the question that had started it all. Things that give you strength, Steve repeated. What gives you strength, Timothy? Timothy looked around the studio, at his family, at the Thompson family who had become part of his story, at Steve Harvey kneeling beside his wheelchair wearing that enormous jacket. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. People who love you even when you're scared. The studio exploded in applause. Steve reached over and hugged Timothy, and in that moment the boy whispered something in Steve's ear that the microphones didn't pick up. What did he say? Steve announced to the studio, his voice full of wonder. He said, thank you for keeping my mom's promise. The cameras kept rolling as both families gathered around Timothy, as Steve gave him his personal phone number, as the audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. But the real story was in the details that television couldn't capture. The way Timothy's grandfather cried not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride. The way the Thompson family insisted on staying in touch, becoming extended family to a boy who needed all the love he could get. The way Steve Harvey kept that letter in his pocket for every show afterward, a reminder of why he really did what he did. The episode wrapped with an unprecedented moment. Steve, still kneeling beside Timothy's wheelchair, looked directly into the camera and spoke not as an entertainer, but as a man who had just witnessed something that changed him. Sometimes, he said, television stops being about entertainment and starts being about truth. Today, a young man and his family reminded us what strength really looks like. Not the kind that comes from winning or losing, but the kind that comes from showing up, from keeping promises, from loving each other through the hardest days. He paused, looking at Timothy, who was still wearing the oversized jacket like a cape of honor. Timothy's mother couldn't be here today, but her love is, her wisdom is, her belief in her son is, and that's the strongest thing any of us will ever see. 6 months later, when the episode aired, it became the most watched Family Feud episode in history. Not because of the game, but because of the moment when entertainment became ministry, when strangers became family, when a mother's final wish proved that love transcends even death. Timothy Rodriguez kept Steve's jacket, but more importantly, he kept the message. The wheelchair that had once made him feel different became a symbol of the strength his mother had always seen in him. He started speaking at schools, sharing his story, helping other kids understand that being different was being powerful. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approached every subsequent show. He learned that the most important moments in television happen not when you follow the script, but when you throw it away and follow your heart. He learned that sometimes a dying mother's letter can teach you more about strength than 40 years of entertainment experience. The letter itself remained private, sacred, exactly where it belonged. But its impact rippled outward, reminding everyone who witnessed that moment that compassion is the most powerful force in the world, that promises matter even after death, and that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when ordinary people choose to see each other's humanity. Timothy's mother had been right about Steve Harvey. He did understand people's hearts. And on that day, he proved that understanding by honoring a promise made by a woman he never met to a son who would never forget the moment when a game show host knelt beside his wheelchair and reminded him that being different was being magnificent. In the years that followed, Timothy would return to that moment whenever he needed strength. The jacket hung in his room, too big for him still, but perfect in its meaning. And every year on the anniversary of that taping, he would send Steve Harvey the same message. Still strong, still grateful, still remembering Mom's promise. Because that's what love looks like when it refuses to die. That's what courage sounds like when it speaks through a child's voice. And that's what happens when a mother's final wish meets a man brave enough to honor it in front of the world.